money. 34 million.
Thanks for stopping by.
Apologies, I'm still waiting on the new delivery, though. You ain't getting it. That's a start. I don't have any of those in stock right now. Trevor, let's be nice. I've seen worse things. Won't end too nasty. Sorry, that's out of stock.
Oh yeah.
That's a whole lot of fast. The penis substitute selection. Enjoy. restricted airspace. Divert your course or you will be shot down.
Nothing like mindless consumerism to fill the void. Man, I love the internet. Porn and retail. Come to Uncle G's.
Right. Anything left of them? Holy shit.
Oh, excuse me. I'm late for a meeting. Enjoy the rest of it. Okay.
Ready for G's.
I got an idea. Why don't you call one of your hot friends and ask them to go out with you? Fantastic.
Michael,
Davey.
are you behaving yourself?
Oh,
And how are the kids?
they're good. I actually need you. Amanda too. How's work?
Work, it's fine. Better than fine. It's good. Had a few lucky breaks. Look after yourself, Mike.
You too, Davey. You too.
I don't like this car. You got lucky, buddy. Shit!
Help! That guy stole my car!
you didn't shit yourself.
Fuck the shit.
Ah, crap.
Oh, thank heaven.
Yeah, like that, like.
Well, it's still in one piece at least. I should be grateful for that. Thank you. My name is Chinese. If there were more people like you, the world would be a much better place. I won't forget this. Bye for now. Why do you have to be such a
Oh,
weirdo?
Rich.
Man,
Pay
that...
more attention to your surroundings.
Look out! Ah, this is total bullshit. What is this shit?
Eagle 6 engaging suspect.
Damn. Oh shit.
Fantastic. Man, I love it. Fantastic.
Okay.
I was gonna climb back up better than what he did. There we go.
The devil is out.
Well, catch over here.
Ah, this is total bullshit. You moron!
is killing me.
Hey, you hit me!
Just gotta use my stomach.
Whatever.
Oh man.
My car, asshole!
That is messed up!
Huh. Why is this in Spanish?
downtown Vinewood.
Hey, you! Get over here! Those guys are after me! Can you get me past them, please? My car's just over there!
All right. Don't worry, I got you.
She's gone. I think she's gone. Damn it.
Earth and Mars.
Strange, but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. On the night and early hours of February 20th and 21st, 1954, while on a vacation to Palm Springs, California, President Dwight Eisenhower went missing and allegedly was taken to Edwards Air Force Base for a secret meeting. When he showed up the next morning at a church service in Los Angeles, reporters were told that he had to have emergency dental treatment the previous evening and had visited a local dentist. A man later appeared at a function that evening and was presented as the dentist who had treated Eisenhower. The missing night and morning has subsequently fueled rumors that Eisenhower was using the alleged dentist visit as a cover story for an extraordinary event. The event is possibly the most significant that any American president could have conducted. An alleged first contact meeting with extraterrestrials at Edwards Air Force Base, and the beginning of a series of meetings with different extraterrestrial races that led to a treaty that was eventually signed. There is circumstantial and testimonial evidence supporting Eisenhower's meeting with extraterrestrials and the start of a series of meetings that culminated in the signing of a treaty with a different group of extraterrestrials. The most intriguing are circumstances surrounding Eisenhower's alleged winter vacation to Palm Springs, California, from February 17th through the 24th, 1954. First, the vacation for the president was announced rather suddenly and came less than a week after Eisenhower's fail shooting vacation in Georgia. According to UFO researcher William Moore, all this was quite unusual and suggested that there was more to the one-week visit to Palm Springs than a simple holiday. Second, on the Saturday night of February 20th, President Eisenhower did go missing, fueling press speculation that he had taken ill, or even possibly died. In a hastily convened press conference, Eisenhower's press secretary announced that Eisenhower had lost a tooth gap while eating fried chicken, and had to be rushed to a local dentist. The local dentist was introduced at an official function on Sunday, February 21st, as the dentist who had treated the president. Moore's investigation of the incident concluded that the dentist's visit was being used as a cover story for Eisenhower's true whereabouts. Consequently, Eisenhower was missing for an entire evening and could easily have been taken from Palm Springs to the nearby Edwards Air Force Base. The unscheduled nature of the president's vacation, the missing president, and the dentist cover story provide circumstantial evidence that the true purpose of his Palm Springs vacation was for him to attend an event whose importance was such that it could not be disclosed to the general public. A meeting with extraterrestrials may well have been the true purpose of his visit. The first public source alleging a meeting with extraterrestrials was from Gerald Light, when a letter dated April 16, 1954 to Meade Lane, the then director of Borderland Sciences Research Associates, claimed he was part of a delegation of community leaders to an alleged meeting with extraterrestrials at Edwards Air Force Base. In a subsequent article, Meade Lane described Light as a gifted and highly educated writer and lecturer who was skilled both in clairvoyance and the occult. Light was a well-known metaphysical community leader in the Southern California area. The alleged purpose of him and others in the delegation was to test public reaction to the presence of extraterrestrials. Light described a meeting of panic and confusion of many of those present, discussions of the emotional impact of the alleged landing, and the tremendous difference of opinion on what to do in terms of telling the public and responding to the extraterrestrial visitors. Plausible descriptions of what may have occurred. Indeed, the psychological and emotional impact Light describes for senior national security leaders at the meeting is consistent with what could be expected for such a life-changing event. There are a number of other sources alleging an extraterrestrial meeting at Edwards Air Force Base that corresponded to a formal first contact event. These sources are based on testimonies of whistleblowers that witnessed documents or learned from their insider contacts of such a meeting. These testimonies describe what appears to be two separate sets of meetings involving different extraterrestrial groups who met either with President Eisenhower and or with Eisenhower administration officials over a short period of time. The first of these meetings, the actual first contact event, did not lead to an agreement, and the extraterrestrials were effectively spurned. The second of these meetings did lead to an agreement, and this has apparently become the basis of subsequent secret interactions with extraterrestrial races involved in the treaty that was signed. There is some discrepancy in the sequence of meetings and where they were held, but all agree that a first contact meeting involving President Eisenhower did occur, and that one of these meetings occurred with his February 1954 visit to Edwards Air Force Base. The first version of Eisenhower's meeting is described by one of the most controversial whistleblowers to ever have come forward into the public arena to describe an extraterrestrial presence. William Cooper served on the Naval Intelligence Briefing Team for the commander of the Pacific Fleet between 1970 through 1973 and had access to classified documents that he had to review in order to fulfill his briefing duties. He describes the background and nature of the first contact with extraterrestrials as follows. In 1953, astronomers discovered large objects in space which were moving toward the Earth. It was first believed that they were asteroids. Later evidence proved that the objects could only be spaceships. Project Sigma intercepted alien radio communications. When the objects reached the Earth, they took up a very high orbit around the equator. There were several huge ships, and their actual intent was unknown. Project Sigma and a new project, Plato, through radio communications using the computer binary language, was able to arrange a landing that resulted in face-to-face contact with alien beings from another planet. Project Plato was tasked with establishing diplomatic relations with this race of space aliens. In the meantime, a race of human-looking aliens contacted the
Young man, who are you? What's your name?
You got no records of you. How'd you get inside this prison? Who put you down that hole? What brings you home? I got a call from Shasta. Found a kid in the cage. Call from who? Don't know yet. How's it been gone?
There's a place where lovers go to cry their troubles away, and they call it,
People say,
Lonesome Town,
every inch of this town
where the broken hearts stay,
is stained with someone's sin.
and the only price you
I
pay.
always thought the devil was just a metaphor. God help me, I did.
I'm telling you, there's something wrong with that kid.
Do you hear it now? You have no idea what's happening here, do you?
I can learn to forget.
The U.S. government. This alien group warned us against the aliens that were orbiting the equator and offered to help us with our spiritual development. They demanded that we dismantle and destroy our nuclear weapons as the major condition. They refused to exchange technology, citing that we were spiritually unable to handle the technology which we then possessed. They believed that we would use any new technology to destroy each other. This race stated that we were on a path of self-destruction, and we must stop killing each other. Stop polluting the earth. Stop raping the earth's natural resources, and learn to live in harmony. These terms were met with extreme suspicion, especially the major condition of nuclear disarmament. It was believed that meeting that condition would leave us helpless in the face of an obvious alien threat. We also had nothing in history to help with the decision. Nuclear disarmament was not considered to be within the best interest of the United States. The overtures were rejected. The significant point about Cooper's version is that the humanoid extraterrestrial race was not willing to enter into technology exchanges that might help weapons development, and instead was focused on spiritual development. Significantly, the overtures of these extraterrestrials were turned down. Confirmation that the first contact meeting involved extraterrestrials who were effectively spurned for taking what might be considered a principled stand on technology assistance and nuclear weapons comes from the son of a former Navy commander who claimed that his father had been present at the first contact event on February 20th and 21st, 1954. According to Charles L. Suggs, a retired sergeant from the U.S. Marine Corps, his father, Charles L. Suggs, was a former commander with the U.S. Navy who attended the meeting at Edwards Air Force Base with Eisenhower. Sergeant Suggs recounted his father's experiences from the meeting in a 1991 interview with a prominent UFO researcher. Charlie's father, Navy Commander Charles Suggs, accompanied President Ike along with others on February 20th. They met and spoke with two white-haired Nordics who had pale blue eyes and colorless lips. The spokesman stood a number of feet away from Ike and would not let him approach any closer. A second Nordic alien stood on the extended ramp of a biconvex saucer that stood on tripod landing gear on the landing strip. According to Charlie, There were B-58 Hustlers on the field even though the first one did not fly officially until 1956. These visitors said they came from another solar system. They posed detailed questions about our nuclear testing. Another whistleblower who confirms that first contact involved an extraterrestrial race being spurned for their principled stand on technology transfer is the son of the famous creator of the Learjet, William Lear. John Lear is a former Lockheed L-1011 captain who flew over 150 test aircraft and held 18 world speed records. During the late 1960s, 1970s, and early 1980s, was a contract pilot for the CIA. Lear developed a close relationship with CIA Director William Colby, who was in charge of covert operations in Vietnam before becoming DCI. According to Lear, there had indeed been a warning from another race prior to an agreement being eventually signed, and he claimed they visited Edwards and the following occurred. In 1954, President Eisenhower met with a representative of another alien species at Edwards Air Force Base. This alien suggested that they could help us get rid of the Greys, but Eisenhower turned down their offer because they offered no technology. Cooper's and Lear's idea of more than one extraterrestrial race interacting with the Eisenhower administration is supported by other whistleblowers, such as former Master Sergeant Robert Dean, who, like Cooper, had access to top-secret documents while working in the intelligence division for the Supreme Commander of a major U.S. military command.
I arrived in the summer of '63 and I was assigned to the Operations Division. I was further assigned to what we call SHOC, the War Room, the Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. And at that time I was given a cosmic top-secret clearance, which was and still is the highest level of security access that NATO has. When I was assigned to the War Room, I learned that a study had been initiated in 1961, and everybody was talking about it. They were gossiping about it. And the subject was UFOs, and that intrigued me a bit. When that study was concluded in 1964, and it was published, and I was still working in the War Room at that time, I had access to this document. I had a chance to read it. And having been exposed to it, I must tell you honestly that my life has never ever quite been the same. Because I read first-hand reports, verifiable NATO military material that indicated that the UFOs were not only real, but they represented something far beyond anything I had ever imagined before. When the study was concluded in '64, they concluded that there were 4 different groups apparently coming and visiting us. Out of those 4 different groups, one group looked exactly like we do, so much so that they could sit beside you in a restaurant, or in an airplane, or in a theater, and you'd never know it. And that particular point bothered the military guys a lot. The point being that some of these people from somewhere could be walking up and down the corridors of State Headquarters, or they could be walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon. One day at lunch, a lieutenant colonel made the remark, he says, Jesus, do you realize they could even be in the White House? And there was a little forced laughter at that point, I remember, because a lot of us over the years have had some misgivings about the occupants of the White House. But the point I'm making is that the idea that aliens could be here in our midst bothered the military, because if you're not paranoid when you go into the service, you're certainly trained very quickly to be so. It's the nature of the military mind, I think, to be paranoid. But that was only part of the story. The shape conclusions in '64 were that there were 4 groups that we knew of. They were apparently interplanetary. Some very likely were interstellar. They even concluded that some of them could be intergalactic. When I retired in 1976, many of our military people knew at that point that we were not simply dealing with visitations from people from other planets or star systems. They had concluded by '76 that some of these visitors very well might be multidimensional in their source. I guess I speak out openly and bluntly about this because I feel so strongly about it. I violate my security oath every time I speak about it. I do it intentionally and I do it on purpose. Because I feel so strongly that the American people not only have a right to know the truth, but they have a need to know the truth. The truth, Don, apparently is simply this, that we're not alone, we've never been alone. We are apparently part of an infinite universe filled with intelligent life.
In Dean's 27-year distinguished military career, he served at the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers, Europe, where he witnessed these documents while serving under the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. Dean claimed, the group at the time, there were just 4 that they knew of for certain, and the Greys were one of those groups. There was a group that looked exactly like we did. There was a human group that looked so much like us. They really drove the admirals and generals crazy because they determined that these people, and they had seen them repeatedly, they had had contact with them. There had been abductions. There had been contacts. 2 other groups. There was a very large group. I say large. They were 6 to 8, maybe, sometimes 9 feet tall. And they were humanoid, but they were very pale, very white. Didn't have any hair on their bodies at all. And then there was another group that had sort of a reptilian quality to them. We had encountered them. Military people and police officers all over the world had run into these guys. They had vertical pupils in their eyes, and their skin seemed to have a quality very much like what you find on the stomach of a lizard. Given the intensity of the Cold War, the national security officials present may well have decided it was more prudent to seek better terms before agreeing to the extraterrestrials' request. White's testimony implies that the meeting at Edwards did not result in an agreement, but instead resulted in intense disagreement between Eisenhower officials. By all accounts, the February 20th and 21st, 1954 meeting was not successful, and the extraterrestrials were spurned due to their refusal to enter into technology exchanges and insistence on nuclear disarmament by the U.S. and presumably other major world powers. Cooper describes the circumstances of a subsequent agreement that was reached after the failure of the first meeting. Cooper has a different version of dates and times for the 1954 meetings. He agrees that there were 2 sets of meetings involving different extraterrestrials meeting with President Eisenhower and or Eisenhower administration officials. Later in 1954, a race of large-nosed gray aliens, which had been orbiting the Earth, landed at Holloman Air Force Base. A basic agreement was reached. This race identified themselves as originating from a planet around a red star in the constellation of Orion, which we called Betelgeuse. They stated that their planet was dying, and that at some unknown future time, they would no longer be able to survive there. The meeting at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico has reportedly been the site of subsequent extraterrestrial meetings with the same extraterrestrials. Cooper explained the terms of the 1954 treaty reached with the gray extraterrestrials as follows. The treaty stated that the aliens would not interfere in our affairs, and we would not interfere in theirs. We would keep their presence on Earth a secret. They would furnish us with advanced technology, and would help us in our technological development. They would not make any treaty with any other Earth nation. They could abduct humans on a limited and periodic basis for the purpose of medical examination and monitoring of our development, with the stipulation that the humans would not be harmed, would be returned to their point of abduction, would have no memory of the event, and that the alien nation would furnish Majesty 12, MJ-12, with a list of all human contacts and abductees on a regularly scheduled basis. Another whistleblower source for a treaty having been signed is Bill Schneider, a former geological engineer that was employed by corporations contracted to build underground bases, working extensively on black projects involving extraterrestrials. He revealed his own knowledge of the treaty in the following. Back in 1954, under the Eisenhower administration, the federal government decided to circumvent the Constitution of the United States and form a treaty with alien entities. It was called the 1954 Grenada Treaty. which basically made the agreement that the aliens involved could take a few cows and test their implanting techniques on a few human beings, but that they had to give details about the people involved. Schneider's knowledge of the treaty would have come with his familiarity with a range of compartmentalized black projects and interaction with other personnel working with extraterrestrials. Significantly, a number of whistleblowers argue that the treaty that was signed involved some compulsion on the part of the extraterrestrials. Don Phillips is a former Air Force serviceman, an employee on clandestine aviation projects, who testified having seen documents describing the meeting between President Eisenhower and extraterrestrials, and the background to a subsequent agreement. We have records from 1954 that were meetings between our own leaders of this country and ETs here in California. And as I understand it from the written documentation, we were asked if we would allow them to be here and do research. I have read that our reply was, well, how can we stop you? You are so advanced. And I will say by this camera and this sound that it was President Eisenhower that had this meeting. Colonel Philip Corso, a highly decorated officer that served in Eisenhower's National Security Council, alluded to a treaty signed by the Eisenhower administration with extraterrestrials in his memoirs. He wrote, "We had negotiated a kind of surrender with them, extraterrestrials, as long as we couldn't fight them. They dictated the terms because they knew what we most feared was disclosure." Corso's claim of a negotiated surrender suggests that some sort of agreement or treaty was reached, which he was not happy with. According to Cooper, the gray extraterrestrials signing the treaty were not trustworthy. In 1955, it became obvious that the aliens had deceived Eisenhower and had broken the treaty. It was suspected that the aliens were not submitting a complete list of human contacts and abductees to the Majesty 12, and it was suspected that not all abductees had been returned. Similarly, Lear argued that the gray extraterrestrials quickly broke the treaty and could not be trusted. A deal was struck that in exchange for advanced technology from the aliens, we would allow them to abduct a very small number of persons, and we would periodically be given a list of those persons abducted. We got something less than the technology we bargained for, and found the abductions exceeded by a millionfold from what we had naively agreed to. Other whistleblowers also suggested that the extraterrestrials who signed the treaty with Eisenhower could not be trusted. Schneider claimed that despite the treaty's provisions on the number of humans who would be abducted for experiments, the aliens altered the bargain until they decided they wouldn't abide by it at all. As mentioned earlier, Colonel Philip Corso similarly believed that the extraterrestrials that the Eisenhower administration entered into agreements with could not be trusted. Corso believed the forced negotiated surrender suggested an extraterrestrial agenda that was suspect. While General Douglas MacArthur didn't directly mention any government treaty with extraterrestrials, he gave a famous warning in October 1955, suggesting that some extraterrestrial presence existed that threatened human sovereignty. We now face a new world, a world of change. We speak in strange terms, harnessing the cosmic energy of ultimate conflict between a united human race and the sinister forces of some other planetary galaxy. The nations of the world will have to unite. The next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of the Earth must someday make a common front against attack by people from other planets. MacArthur may well have been alluding to the same extraterrestrials that Corso, Cooper, and Lear believed had entered into an agreement with the Eisenhower administration. Significantly, reports of contacts with extraterrestrials began to change once the alleged treaty began to be implemented. The friendly Space Brothers reports involving contactees of the 1950s changed as reports of abductions began to emerge after the first recorded case in 1961 involving Barney and Betty Hill. Another apparent pattern that has occurred in ufology is the dominance of the Space Brothers of the 1950s, who were kind, interacted with people who became known as contactees, and took people for rides in their spacecrafts. This pattern changed dramatically with the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill in the early 1960s. Due to the official secrecy policy adopted towards the extraterrestrial presence, it may be concluded that some, if not most, of the controversy surrounding these individuals has been caused by military intelligence agencies intent on discrediting whistleblower or witness testimonies. While there continues to be uncertainty caused by the controversy surrounding whistleblower testimonies and the role of military intelligence agencies in generating this controversy, the bulk of evidence points to a first contact meeting having occurred during Eisenhower's Palm Spring vacation on February 20th and 21st, 1954. The testimonies suggest that the extraterrestrials in the first contact event, a race of tall, Nordic extraterrestrials, were spurned due to their reluctance to provide advanced technology in an agreement. A subsequent meeting and treaty was then signed with a different set of extraterrestrials, commonly called Greys, who did not have the same reluctance in exchanging extraterrestrial technology as part of an agreement. Most of the available evidence that has found its way into the public arena suggests that the extraterrestrial race with whom the treaty was signed, the Greys, are at best an enigma, and at worst simply untrustworthy in their treatment of abducted civilians. The subsequent shift in witness reports from friendly extraterrestrial contacts to disturbing abductions suggests that the Eisenhower administration had signed a treaty with extraterrestrials whose motivations and activities were an enigma as far as the general public interest was concerned. The activities of the Grey extraterrestrials apparently continues to raise uncertainty for U.S. national security agencies in terms of an appropriate strategic response. On the contrary, the friendly Nordic Space Brothers faded from the scene since the Eisenhower administration saw them as not sufficiently motivated to serve the technological and strategic goals of U.S. national security agencies. The question of when disclosure of the treaty signed by Eisenhower and of the extraterrestrial presence might occur is one that has long been anticipated. According to Craig Capitas, who covered the World Economic Forum at Davos, Switzerland back in 2004, world leaders discussed extraterrestrials at one or more closed sessions. In a story published on January 21st, 2004, Capitas claimed that Forum officials maintain their 5-day program on partnering for security and prosperity requires an unambiguous examination of extraterrestrial presence on Earth. This has been another SBT story. Tell us what you thought of this story in the comments below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and sign up for notifications so you know when the next video drops here on our channel. Thanks for watching. I'm Steve White. Until next time.
The KKK is planning an attack.
How do you propose to make this investigation?
I'm going undercover in a Ku Klux Klan. I'm born and raised.
The wars are coming. I gotta get enough people with these guys. That's what I'm talking about. Out of the people.
Black Klansman. Watch the trailer at blackklansman.com. In theaters August 10th.
Strange, yet true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. Aliens living among us. One of the strangest stories to ever come from the UFO community is that of an extraterrestrial named Val Valiant Thor. Val Valiant Thor was supposedly a being from the planet Venus that looked exactly like a human. Val arrived on Earth on this ship with 3 others and worked with the government and the Pentagon for about 3 years. What makes this story so special is that there are a number of actual photos and sources verifying the existence of this event actually taking place. The initial story stems from Frank Strange's book, Stranger at the Pentagon, and is verified by the late whistleblower Phil Schneider, claiming the extraterrestrial Val worked with his father while in the military. Here is a clip of Phil Schneider giving details on Val Valiant Thor. This lecture was given right before Schneider's apparent suicide.
In fact, I have a picture, let me reach for it here. I have a picture of one of the aliens been working for the United States Pentagon for the last 58 years. His name is Val Valiant Thor. He's right here. That's my father in the background. This whole place, the ready room of the USS Eldridge, Al Bielek has probably explained, or maybe even shown you this picture. There's a list of some of the notable people in it, and all the atomic bomb scientists of the day. This was in August of 1943. Now this guy has not changed one iota in 58 years. His brain capacity 300 centimeters greater than ours. He has a thinking capacity, IQ, if you were to measure it, be totally off the scale, be about a 1200 IQ. He speaks 100 languages fluently, alien as well as others. He's a remarkable person. I had a chance to meet him one time.
Following are a few excerpts from Dr. Frank Strange's book, Stranger at the Pentagon, which might give us a few more details of this mysterious visitor and his mission on Earth. Dr. Frank Strange writes, when I asked him where he was from, he replied, I am from the planet that is called Venus. I asked him how many visitors from Venus were presently on Earth, and he said, there are presently 77 of us walking among you in the United States. We are constantly coming and going. The first meeting with the President. March 16, 1957, in Alexandria, Virginia. One of the finest leaders of the planet Venus, operating under the direction of the Central Control, and who had been chosen to make the contact as well as direct the project, landed his craft and was met by 2 police officers, weapons drawn. A thought transference quickly convinced them that he meant no harm, and he was ushered into the back seat of their patrol car. After crossing over into Washington, D.C., they were met by the Secretary of Defense along with 6 of his staff members. Soon police from every conceivable district and agency had joined in, all trying to claim their right to escort him to President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Through his own version of the power of positive thinking, he was able to dismiss them all and soon passed through the security posts, followed by an Air Force captain. Meanwhile, his presence in the area had thrown everyone into a dilemma. The introduction he held from the High Council worried them because, though not written in any earthly language, their minds were given power to properly translate the inscribed message. Captain Poole, not his real name, asked him to remain, and after downing 2 plain bourbons, muttered, "My God, why couldn't this have happened on my day off?" Suddenly, the door opened and 6 armed guards led Val to what appeared to be an elevator. It went rapidly to the bottommost level. Maximum security was in place. After transferring to an underground train, they sped toward the White House. 6 officials, 6 armed guards, and 3 Secret Servicemen escorted him into the office of President Eisenhower. From behind the desk, the President rose while the Secret Servicemen remained nervous and uneasy. As he extended his hand to shake that of the President, the Secret Servicemen drew their revolvers and pointed them at Val. Following the nod of the President, they reluctantly lowered their guns. Standing in front of his desk, the President said, "Of course, you know we have suspended all rules of protocol. I have a good feeling toward you. Please, sir, what is your name? And where do you come from?" "I come from the planet your Bible calls the morning and the evening star." "Venus." "Yes, sir." "Can you prove this?" the President asked. "What do you constitute as proof?" The President quickly retorted, "I don't know." "Will you come with me to my ship?" The president answered with a quizzical look and said, "My friend, I cannot come and go as I please. There are others to be considered. There are committees to be consulted and security measures to be adhered to. Please spend some time with us here. Let's get better acquainted, learn more about one another, and perhaps soon, real soon, well, we shall see." Richard Nixon. At that moment, another gentleman rushed into the room. It turned out to be Vice President Richard Nixon. He appeared to Val to be very sharp, quick-witted, with fixed eyes and an amazing aptitude toward speed and proficiency. "My name is Valiant," he said as the Vice President thrust his hand without hesitation. "You have certainly caused a stir for an out-of-towner." The Vice President smiled as he continued, "Of course, we are not totally convinced of anything just yet, but suffice it to say we are checking and double-checking everything you say and do. When Sergeant Young from Alexandria radioed in and stated that you had just landed in a flying saucer, we thought," he continued, "Sergeant Young had flipped. Say, were you in on that UFO flap over Washington? You certainly had us all in a dilly, if you were." After assuring them that this planet had been under close scrutiny for hundreds of years before the 1945 bomb blast, and with his special letter still in the slightly quivering hand of the president, he was requested to follow the Secret Service back the way they had come, to the Pentagon and into a beautifully furnished apartment where he would spend the next 3 years. Fortunately, he was prepared for such a lengthy visit and kept in constant communication with the starship. There were many occasions during which he teleported himself in and out of those quarters, often exercising trans-imagery to cause the security guards to visualize his face on a non-existent badge. Soon after his arrival, together with 3 members of his crew, he joined a convention in the backyard of the home of Mr. Howard Mindry in High Bridge, New Jersey. The month was April 1957. A certain group of individuals who were interested in UFOs were meeting that day. Val and his crew members, Don, Jill, and Tanya, had changed into the same type of clothing worn by their Earth friends. The meeting was very interesting, and these people were on the right track. He was dismayed to learn the undignified manner in which these people were treated by the press. Nevertheless, these people were pursuing their beliefs, and this was good. A curious young photographer, August C. Ross, snapped several pictures, thinking he was doing so without Val's knowledge. The photographer seemed to be greatly troubled when he attempted to talk to him. Yet, it was those very photographs which were to bring me together with this unusual man on that cold December day. Holding the message from the High Council in his hand, the President stated that Val's offer to help the human family would upset the economy of the United States and could plunge her into the abyss of chaos. In brief, he politely told Val that the people of this planet were not ready to cope with such conditions as would come into existence if the recommendations of this unearthly visitor were put into action. Nevertheless, he was invited to assist a number of scientists who were out working on medical projects directly associated with the space sciences. His allotted time to acquaint the leaders of the United States with his suggestions was limited to 3 years. During this time, he refused to advise them regarding a certain bomb in the sky, which we now know as the Star Wars system. In his apartment, provided by the Pentagon, he was able to maintain communications with his ship and was kept informed of the growing world tensions. His uniform underwent rigid tests from the government. By today's standards, they would now be obsolete. They attempted to penetrate the material with a diamond drill bit. The diamond snapped under pressure. Acid rolled off the uniform and burned a hole in the floor. They fired a high-velocity rifle at the uniform, but it failed to pierce it. The report to the President read, "Physical appearance, soft silver and gold lustrous. Fabric, unknown. Weight, 6 ounces. Total, including boots. Cut. Close fitting like a tunic. No cuffs, pockets, buttons, zippers, clips, or hooks. RXT2 tests. Indestructible." Finally, a bright-eyed colonel escorted him to a place where the final test would be performed. Val looked at the laser instrument amusedly. Upon command, The laser aimed a fine line of intense light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. The colonel began his discourse that this device contained a crystal synthetic ruby in which atoms, when stimulated by focused light waves, amplify and concentrate these waves, then emit the beam. As the colonel continued to speak, his smile gave way to utter dismay, the ray being totally ineffective against the dark. He babbled on long after the laser had been turned off. He reiterated how powerful the U.S. had become since the splitting of the atom. He gave Val a lesson in atomic fusion. He went on to state that when a chain reaction of nuclear fission is set off by a neutron bombardment in the atoms, or a charge of plutonium or uranium isotope on an atomic weight of 235, U-235, an immense quantity of energy is suddenly released. The good colonel finally talked himself out, and Val was conducted back to his quarters, along with his uniform. 1959 was fast drawing to a close. Chiefs of state were in a constant turmoil, and confusion was the rule of the day. Indecision caused delay after delay. Economists and industrial giants conferred with politicians and military heads daily. Government leaders could not reconcile Val's being in a position to force their hand if he so desired. Several scientists attempted to learn the secrets of interstellar travel, without success. Christmas week was now upon us. I had been busily presenting a series of scientific lectures and speaking at a number of churches in Washington, D.C. Earlier that month, I had returned from Cuba, where I met personally with Fidel Castro. Unbeknownst to me, Val, working with Nancy Warren, formulated a plan whereby I would be contacted. Many Earth people live one life openly, while in their hearts and minds they live quite another. Double-mindedness seemed to be a way of life in the Pentagon building that served as the busy nerve center of our nation. Val once remarked to me that he had never witnessed in one central location such concentrated confusion. Nancy attended the lecture/service which I conducted at the National Evangelistic Center, pastored by Dr. John Mears in Washington, D.C. Following the conclusion of my talk, she approached the platform and asked to speak to me. Strangely enough, a photographer in New Jersey had given Val's photographs to me, and I had been displaying them at my lectures ever since. I had no personal knowledge of them, other than what I had been told by the photographer. When she was unable to grab my attention while I was signing copies of my book, Saucerama, she showed her Pentagon ID, and that got my attention quickly, to say the least. We borrowed the pastor's study, and she asked me if I would like to meet the man in the photographs personally. Of course, I answered, with a resounding yes. She then asked if I could follow instructions to the letter, to which I replied that I could, and she told me to meet her at the curb in front of my hotel at 8 a.m. the next morning. Nancy arrived precisely on time, and thus began the journey which at times would seem unreal, but which later would prove beyond doubt that there is truly life in God's universe. Those of you familiar with the Pentagon know that the normal traffic flow approaching it is to the right. We drove to the left. I knew then that something strange was going on. We had to stand in line to pass by a security guard. First one, then a second. Visualized an identification badge on my lapel. Something was making him see this. This utterly amazed me, and I felt that at any moment I would be picked up, handcuffed, and thrown into some jail somewhere. This, of course, was only my imagination and anticipation of what was about to take place. Nancy left me standing in front of a door which contained no markings. As the door opened, I walked in and stood on the threshold. My stocky form shifted from one foot to the other as I cleared my throat. The three men in the room were completely unaware of my presence and ignored me. I was puzzled, to say the least. Later, I would find out that Val had clouded their minds and rendered them oblivious to the entire session. They continued with their work. In walked a man, about 6 feet tall, perhaps 185 pounds, brown, wavy hair, brown eyes. His complexion appeared normal and slightly tan. As I approached him and he looked at me, it was as though he looked straight through me. with a warm smile, and extending his hand, he greeted me by name. "Hello, friend. How are you?" His genuineness astonished me, but quickly I understood. As I gripped his hand, I was somewhat surprised to feel the soft texture of his skin, like that of a baby spot, with the strength of a man that silently testified to his power and intensity. His voice was very strong and mellow. It was filled with purpose and character. I again looked around the room to see whether the other men would say or do anything. They were still working, as if I weren't there. I noticed that he was wearing the same type of clothing as I. When I asked if he possessed any other clothing, he said that he had given several officials a garment so they could run tests on it. He then proceeded to a closet and produced a one-piece suit that glittered as the sun which streamed in through the window hit the fabric. I thought that it looked like liquid sunshine. I asked him about the material from which it was made. He answered, "It is made of a material not of this earth." The general appearance of the suit was all but one piece, even down to the boots. It contained no buttons, zippers, or snaps. I asked him how it held together. He demonstrated by holding the front together and passing his hand over it as if to smooth it out. I could not even locate the opening. It was held together by an invisible force. He told me that his purpose in coming was to help mankind return to love. He spoke in positive terms, always with a smile on his face. He said that man was further away from love, which is God, more than ever before, but there was still a good chance if man looks in the right place. He told me he had been here nearly 3 years and would depart in just a few months. Claiming that he would not use force to speak with men in authority in America, he was happy to consult with them at their invitation. He further stated that thus far only a few men in Washington knew of his existence in the Pentagon, and few leaders had availed themselves of his advice during these past 3 years. He felt there was still so much to do, and that his time of departure was getting near. When I asked him where he was from, he replied, "I am from the planet that is called Venus." I asked him how many visitors from Venus were presently on Earth, and he said, "There are presently 77 of us walking among you in the United States. We are constantly coming and going." During the next 30 minutes, he told me things about myself that even I did not know. Later, I was able to verify them with my parents and grandparents. He gave me information regarding the gravitational pull of Venus in comparison to Earth. I was informed that the abdominal muscles hold flesh firm against the mild gravitational pull, which is 3/20 less than that of Earth. He gave me information which would be revealed to others over a period of years. Life on other planets and a plan for Earth? His reply was, "There is life on many other planets of which people on Earth know nothing. There are more solar systems for which man has not even given the Creator credit for. I left that meeting astounded, greatly encouraged, and yet with a heavy heart, not knowing what the future would hold. I began to wonder who would believe me if I ever told of this strange encounter with a man from another planet. I first considered not repeating this extraordinary story, but the more I thought about it, the more I prayed about it, the more I felt that it would bring a great blessing to those who would hear and read. This interplanetary traveler possessed a wealth of knowledge, not only about science, but also about me. He stated that my book, Saucerama, could not have been written without heavenly guidance. Val's instructions were to leave Washington, D.C. no later than March 16, 1960. That meant that there were less than 3 months during which he could confer with scientists, politicians, military men, and the like. All missed his point entirely. They were all filled with self-ambition and cared little for the pressing needs of mankind. His efforts to bring about an end to the sickness and disease that plagued this planet were met with pathetic refusal. He was told over and over that his presence and his ideas were a threat to the political and economic structure. Certain religious leaders were also fearful of losing a grip on the people in the event that his presence was admitted on an official level. It was very disheartening that the administration failed to lay hold of such information that would change the course of human activities for the good because of economic reasons. Security regulations were very tight, but despite the fact that they knew he would come and go as he pleased, they delighted in playing their game. Val had vowed not to use force, and so another course of action would be necessary if the information which he had to relate were to be disseminated. This is the reason why he contacted men of honorable character and strength around the world. Many are presently working in close contact with Val and other members of his crew. His last meeting with the president did not reap any lasting results. He wanted to let the world know of Val's proposed plan. But the Secretary of Defense, the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, and the military chiefs of staff were opposed to his suggestion. The president attempted to effect a joint meeting before the General Assembly of the United Nations, but this plan too was rejected. He was informed that the UN would receive a special press release in the form of a memorandum to the Secretary General no later than February 7, 1966. These leaders of the U.S. government argued long into the night, fearing that if the people of this nation learned of the plan Val was offering, they might choose to follow him instead of them. When a man feels that his personal peace and tranquility may be threatened, the human reaction is always that of swift self-preservation. At one point, the vice president insisted that the pressure boys allow the president to make the choice. He was vetoed without even a chance to complete his statements. World conditions were not going any better. Much international pressure was being brought to bear upon the administration. They fought diligently and enforced rigid regulations with stiff penalties for revealing Val's presence. Even a major newscaster who inadvertently learned of his visit through one of his paid informants was silenced by none other than the Central Intelligence Agency, which has consistently disclaimed all knowledge concerning UFOs. Meanwhile, they maintained secret files that could actually prove the existence of intelligent life in the universe beyond all doubt. The morning of March 15, 1960, saw Val meeting with Nancy Warren, who would continue to work inside the Pentagon and be one of his contacts in the Washington, D.C. area. She would continue communication with others who would become part of his Earth contacts. There are still to this day many adversaries to human freedom. These parasites have embedded themselves in all phases of human society and will never be exposed except by extraterrestrial intervention. There are confused individuals who have perfected a saucer-type aircraft. Some of these are the result of an attempt by some to institute a master race. Remnants of this group still exist. These craft which they designed are still seen from time to time in areas of South America, where some of those involved in the original plans still reside. These should not be confused with the spacecraft originating from other worlds or those coming from the interior of this planet. Nor should the occupants of craft originating from other worlds be confused with those evil messengers who do not originate from Earth but were cast into it after the first war ever recorded. They are in league with earthly low-grades who have condemned themselves because of their own choices. On March 16th, Val dematerialized and departed from this phase of his earthly mission. His next stop was the outskirts of Alexandria, Virginia, where his ship and his crew awaited his arrival, hidden by a wooded area. It was no problem for him to reassemble the atoms of his body inside his ship. As his craft rose slowly, a number of people stopped and pointed excitedly in his direction. Others stood motionless, transfixed by the sight which they beheld. He felt such a tremendous feeling of love for all of them. There was no panic, just curiosity and a strong desire to know more. Then, as the U.S. Air Force jets were scrambled, and with the force field now in full use, the planes darted past the ship, unable to see them now. Even ground radar lost them on their equipment. Confusion once again reigned. On the way back to Victor 1, he meditated on his home planet, the low, heavy, colorful clouds, the even temperatures, the perfectly diffused sunlight, that made shadows almost non-existent, the lushness of the rich green grass surrounding his home. He was informed of several Earth people with whom he would maintain contact for a long time into the future. Strangely enough, those who knew of its presence, yet who claimed disbelief, were those who feared the most. Others figured they should have been the ones contacted, and not those who were. Upon returning to his home planet, he advised the Council of Central Control of the results of his Earth visit, including the failure of the leaders of the United States to take him up on his offer of advice and assistance to the human family. He was given the following instructions: to mingle with and become as Earth people, to work and labor in Earth enterprises, to help those who encounter possible threat or danger while striving for world peace, to give them advice and guidance, to entrust with superior knowledge those who have proven themselves, divulge the essence of their mission to the collective national leaders of Earth, only when the time is right. As of this writing, he continues with this mission, at the same time assisting in preventing our civilization from being the cause of orbital chaos by the destruction of our planet. This strange but true story is taken from excerpts from Frank Strange's book, Stranger at the Pentagon. What do you think? Were we visited in 1957 by an alien from the planet Venus? Let us know in the comments below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks to those who have, and thanks for listening to this strange but true story. I'm Steve White. Until next time.
I don't think there's any question today that there are secret governments.
It's clear that there has been an organized effort to discredit every aspect of the UFO phenomenon.
The UFO cover-up began with legitimate national security concerns.
When you're dealing with the military, especially in matters of secrecy, the idea is to deceive.
It's likely that we're going to find out for sure whether this Roswell event happened or not.
How on earth would you keep a secret like that so long?
Almost 60 years after Roswell, the mystery of what crashed in the deserts of New Mexico remains a secret. The government's official stance about the existence of UFOs has always been denial. Eyewitnesses have come and gone. Project Blue Book, the UFO study program of the U.S. Air Force, has gone out of business. But many questions remain. Researchers and private investigators continue to follow every lead in hopes that someday the truth will be revealed. Newly leaked classified government documents may be the first real evidence to shed light on this never-ending story.
I decided that instead of looking at photographs, or instead of trying to sort out new witness testimony, then it'd be better to try a different approach, which was the approach of authenticating documents.
Dating from the 1940s and 1950s, these documents refer to extraterrestrial contact and the secret operation established to investigate this phenomenon. This project was led by a group of men appointed by executive order. They operated under the code name Majestic 12, or simply MJ-12.
If it is true that the United States government has pursued a very aggressive but deeply clandestine effort to collect and contain information about UFO phenomena, including crashes, military encounters, and whatnot, it is absolutely essential that there be documents about that effort. And when I look at the MJ-12 documents, I say to myself, these are the kinds of documents a person would expect to see. This kind of document has to exist.
It is the unanimous opinion of the members that Operation Majestic 12 be a fully funded, operational, top-secret research and development intelligence gathering agency. It is also recommended that a panel of experts be appointed to chair and oversee the functions and operations of said agency. Its members should have appropriate security clearances.
What impresses me most about these documents is all these check of the details. We've got so many names to check out, so many dates, and so many places. We'll be at this for the next couple of years, but so far it looks impressive that these things are checking out to be true, real, and authentic.
A major objection to all the documents is that we don't know who provided them. We have to consider, of course, that whoever did was violating the law and would be subject to enormous penalties for photographing classified documents and giving them to people who don't have any authorization to receive them.
It began in 1988. I began filing Freedom of Information Act requests to the government for any information on UFOs. In October 1992, I went to the post office and I pulled out a Time magazine that had a document inserted in it, and I just thought it was a prank. I was working my shift as a security officer at Monument Landing. An old gentleman came to the gate and he said, "Well, I'm Thomas Kentwood." He told me he was in the Army's counterintelligence and interplanetary phenomenon unit since 1942 and had been involved in the UFO program almost into the 1980s. He just wanted to let me know that he was real, to tell me everything, get it off his chest, because he didn't think he had much longer to live.
The IPU stands for the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit, and this is rumored to have been a unit within the Army, late 40s, early 50s. Some people link the late Douglas MacArthur with this group, but they were involved in some kind of early UFO investigation.
My father himself had been involved in the United States Air Force's UFO program for several years. I also learned after my father's death, by going through his papers, that he was awarded the Air Force Commendation Medal and was given a special citation by order of General May for his outstanding work in the United States Air Force UFO program.
It's very clear to me that UFOs are real. The data that we have at hand establishes that beyond a shadow of a doubt, to my mind. And that some of them certainly are involved observations of alien spacecraft. This is a completely independent question for whether or not the MJ-12 documents are real themselves and are valid.
I had no interest or beliefs in UFOs, and I never considered giving any thought to the phenomenon itself. But when your own father tells you they're real, the Air Force considered them very threatening to the United States Air Force, then I began to have a different attitude.
The documents that Dick Cooper had were really very extensive. There were 100 pages, 50,000 words. The things that they talk about, however, are stunning.
A consensus reached by members of the panel that until positive proof that the Russians did not attempt a series of reconnaissance flights over our most secure installations, the sightings and recovered objects are interplanetary in nature. Buried in one of these MJ-12 documents is the White Hot Report, It is a reference to a discovery in 1941. This alludes to the possibility that a UFO crashed in the United States 6 years before the Roswell event.
I originally read the first account, at least that I'm aware of, the only real account of the Cape Girardeau 1941 crash retrieval event. And Leonard Springfield's 1991 volume about crash sketches. And I didn't think a lot about it until one of these newer MJ-12 documents mentioned the crash in Missouri. I decided I was going to find Charlotte Mann.
Grandfather had been called out, that someone had called in that there had been a plane crash outside of town, and would he be willing to go to minister to people there, which he did. Upon arrival, it was a very different situation. It was not a conventional aircraft as we know it. There were 3 entities or non-human people there. 2 were just outside the saucer, and a 3rd one was further out. His understanding was that perhaps that 3rd one was not dead on impact. So Father did pray over them, give them last rites. Not long after they arrived, military just showed up. Surrounded the area. Grandfather didn't know what was said to the others, but he was told, this didn't happen, you didn't see this, this is national security, it is never to be talked about again.
The year following the Cape Girardeau report, Los Angeles was the site of more UFO activity. The LA air raid allegedly produced 2 more downed saucers, one just off the coast of California.
The Army Air Corps also recovered a similar object in the San Bernardino Mountains, east of Los Angeles, which cannot be identified as conventional aircraft. This headquarters has come to a determination that the mystery airplanes are in fact not earthly, and according to secret intelligence sources, they are in all probability of interplanetary origin.
With the United States at war, it appears that President Roosevelt saw this interplanetary phenomenon not as a threat, but as a great opportunity.
I have considered the disposition of the material in possession of the Army that may be of great significance toward the development of a superweapon of war.
A new superweapon was developed to win the war. It was tested in remote areas of New Mexico and Nevada. Dr. Robert Oppenheimer led the top-secret Manhattan Project that would change the world forever.
This time round, stakes are kind of high. It's going to work all right, Robert. And I'm sure you'll never be sorry for it. Well, we'll know in 40 seconds.
As the atom bomb experiments continued, so did the sightings of UFOs. Many believed that it was this nuclear testing that actually drew these mysterious objects to the area.
The government's first official UFO program study showed that UFOs were very interested in things atomic, things that generated plutonium. And our documents also show that. Specifically, there's one case where they talk about a crash site just a half a mile from the Trinity site, which is the first atomic test on the planet.
This is the gallant crew that drove the big superport which carried the first atomic bomb to Japan. Piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, Jr. of Miami, carrying Navy Captain William Parks of Chicago, who helped design the bomb as observer, and Major Thomas Farraby of Montville, North Carolina, who pulled the plug on Hiroshima. The B-29 dropped its load of atomic death, which exploded with a force equal to 20,000 tons of TNT.
When the bomb was dropped on Japan in 1945, the war ended, but the UFO activity did not. In June of 1947, physicist Albert Einstein and nuclear scientist Robert Oppenheimer drafted a report offering their opinions on how to deal with extraterrestrial biological entities if they did indeed exist.
It is difficult to predict what the attitude of international law will be with regard to the occupation by celestial peoples of certain locations on our planet. But the only thing that can be foreseen is that there will be a profound change in traditional concepts.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
When news of a crashed saucer near Roswell, New Mexico hit the airwaves, the government was ready. The saucer quickly became a downed weather balloon, and the policy of evasion became the order of the day. It would last for decades.
I think the U.S. Air Force explanation of the mogul balloons, what crashed at Roswell, is just speechless. First of all, the timing is wrong. The technologies are wrong. Certainly pieces of a mogul balloon or the sensor systems attached there too would have been identifiable, and they aren't. I believe that these kinds of answers actually do a disservice both to the American people and to the Air Force itself.
I'm here to discuss the so-called flying saucer. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States. In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports. We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations.
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin. During a 3-year investigation, I found that many pilots have described objects of substance and high speed. One case, pilots reported their plane was buffeted by an object which passed in at 500 miles an hour. Obviously, this was a solid object, and I believe it was from outer space.
I'm certain that there have been several recoveries of alien craft and bodies in the United States. I'm using the word several advisedly, but it could be very conservative. Roswell was not the first incident. And my feeling is that the Missouri incident in 1941, as related by the Reverend William Huffman to his granddaughter, did indeed occur.
I believe there's a cover-up on the UFO subject because so many different things point to it. Clear, well-documented reports from credible witnesses, a lot of documentary information from the archives, a pattern of denial from the government that looks almost silly, a pattern of denial from scientists that is clearly informed not by facts, but by some kind, I would say an indirect kind of intimidation. The reason I feel the Air Force and the government in general is trying to destroy my father is so that they can destroy the Roswell again. That must mean that there really is something there they have to hide, that this must be kept from the public at all costs.
When you're dealing with the military, especially in matters of secrecy, the idea is to deceive. There is a manual, you well know, that I-12, which also states to discourage witnesses, to put out false statements, to protect the secrecy of this 1947 event.
One of the first documents that I got was entitled Extraterrestrial Entities and Technology Recovery and Disclosure. The content of the Special Operations Manual is really quite stunning. It explains why it's so important to keep the secret and how they go about the process, how they keep the public in the dark, what lies they tell them, what deceptive statements.
Great care must be taken to preserve the security of any location where extraterrestrial technology might be retrievable for scientific study. The most desirable response would be that nothing unusual has occurred. It may become necessary to issue false statements to preserve the security of the site.
We continue to study the Special Operations Manual and look at each aspect of it and try to determine the authenticity of it. Subtleties like the use of the term Central Intelligence instead of Central Intelligence Agency show a subtle amount of arrogance that is indicative of the Central Intelligence Agency in 1954.
The 32-page Special Operations Manual also includes the Extraterrestrial Technology Classification Table. It details procedures for retrieval of crashed saucers, how to handle organic matter, and where to ship the bodies. The Blue Lab at Wright Field in Ohio was the secret destination for some of this material. A young woman named June Crane worked in a classified office at the base. Shortly before she died, she told her story.
I started at Wright-Patterson in '42. I was 18 years old, and all of the people I worked with were older than me. So I'm probably the last survivor of my lab group, and probably the last one still around to talk about it. I had acute clearance. I worked with scientists and with engineers. I knew a man named Clarence Smith. He was a master sergeant. He came in one day before we started work, very upset. Clarence told us that his plane brought back 2 bodies in crates from New Mexico. When I asked which plane had crashed, he said, it wasn't a plane, it was a flying saucer. Well, they knew of 3 crashes that I was aware of by 1952. Maybe there were more. In '52, there was a crash cover-up. Roswell was in '47. That Bloom story was a damn lie then, and it's still a lie.
When I interviewed June, I realized that I was getting a rare glimpse into another period of time that was right at the heart of the mystery of ufology. I began to understand the full extent of the cover-up, the difference between what was commonly known to engineers and scientists and what is probably still known to this day and what has been revealed to the public.
An officer showed me a piece of metal. I think that it was Lieutenant Rose. He was one of those guys in the office who liked to talk to me. Lieutenant Rose asked me to break it up, tear it apart if I could. He handed me the scissors. I couldn't dent it or cut it. I asked him what it was and where it came from. He said that it was a piece of a spaceship.
According to the Special Operations Manual, the physical evidence from the crash was to be collected and transported to an undisclosed location for study. That location appears to have been the mysterious Area 51.
I'm satisfied and very pleased that there is good reason to say that Area 51 was created in the early 50s. Now we have that reason. We didn't have that reason before.
Skeptics have claimed that Area 51 did not exist when the Special Operations Manual was published in 1954. But according to this Las Vegas newspaper, a huge government installation began construction in the Nevada desert in early 1951. The project was cloaked in a security blackout and has remained so to this day. Many believe it is where the technology of these alien craft is being studied.
The colleges want to ask the question. I don't know the answer, but to ask the question of to what extent might we have been successful in reverse engineering some of the discoveries from crashed flying saucers.
Now that the sound barrier has been cracked, a thermal or heat barrier is the goal of the experimental X-2 rocket plane. The stainless steel bullet, designed to stand speeds of more than 2,000 miles an hour, is released. On these tests, the rocket plane is not fueled, but in future runs, when it attains maximum velocity, heat developed by friction may reach more than 1,000 degrees. Here, the ability of metal and alloys to withstand the heat are expected to provide valuable data for projected spaceships and satellites. The slim metal ship may furnish some of the answers as the world enters the space age.
The Atomic Energy Commission and Nuclear Energy Propulsion of Aircraft are currently conducting research for advanced technologies in atomic engines and radical propulsion studies. Integration of hydrogen-based fuels and electro-hydrodynamic technology may open up for us development of super aerodynes with Mach 5 capabilities.
Some of the technology, yes, they have improved on or discovered, and that is being used today. Yeah, I think everything that we were involved in from 1942 clear up to 1947 was justified.
Just weeks after the crashes at Roswell, President Harry Truman named James B. Forrestal as the first Secretary of Defense. On September 24, 1947, a top-secret research and development operation was established under his direction. It was called Majestic 12.
It's my understanding that MJ-12 was basically a sort of oversight, administrative, policy-making group, very small. And that the people who are responsible to MJ-12 were very select people in various branches of the intelligence community, the military, and military department. So it was very compartmented. It wasn't some huge operation.
MJ-12 supervised several agencies involved in various aspects of the UFO phenomenon. But only the 12 Majestic members knew the whole story, and they reported only to the President on a need-to-know basis.
One of the reasons that there are so few leaks is that 9 out of 10 people are loyal Americans when they sign a security oath, and they are rigorously defending what they've agreed to. Namely, they're not going to tell anybody. And so therefore, really only 1 out of 1,000 persons ever gets close to leaking the story.
One of the most stunning documents that arrived into Cooper's mailbox was the first annual report of the Majestic 12 operation. And this was a primary report and then 3 annexes comprising 17 pages. Many unusual commentaries were included. Everything from missing soldiers to airplanes that had been shot down while chasing UFOs. There's a section called Government Policy of Control and Denial.
One of the most difficult aspects of controlling the perception in the public's mind of government attempts of denial and ignorance is actual control of the press.
People ask, how on earth would you keep a secret like that for so long? And the way to do it was to begin with the security procedures that we developed during the Manhattan Engineering Project for the first counterpart. Compartmentalization, to tell each group only a little bit of the story, so hardly anybody has the picture. And then, of course, security tests, security oaths, fines, and ultimately threats.
There's a section called Constitutional and Domestic Issues, and it states,
in dealing with clear violations of civic law and guarantees as defined under the Constitution, it has been discussed among members of Majestic 12 that such protection of individual rights are outweighed by the nature of the threat.
Clearly, they thought that ETs landing or being involved in the American citizenry was so important that they would control, capture, and manage every aspect of that interaction.
It's a very interesting group of people. 6 civilian, 6 military, 2 Air Force, 2 Army, 2 Navy. And some of them were very well known, but some of them weren't very well known, but turned out to be perfectly appropriate.
As President-elect Dwight Eisenhower was preparing to take office, he was briefed about the ongoing UFO investigations of his elite group.
I believe the Eisenhower briefing document is checking. The list of members, I thought that would indicate it was phony because Dr. Donald Menzel, a Harvard University professor of astronomy, was listed as a member. But he was a total skeptic. He wrote 3 anti-UFO books. You certainly don't need a security clearance to teach astronomy at Harvard. First of all, the objects are not unidentified. We know what they are. Second, in most cases, are not flying. And finally, in many cases, they are not even material objects. I discovered, to my total amazement, that he led a double life, that he worked with the National Security Agency, worked with the CIA, and top secret open clearance, They classified work for 30 companies. None of this was known.
By the time Eisenhower read this above top-secret document, the founder of the Majestic 12, James Forrestal, was dead. In March of 1949, he was diagnosed with depression and ordered to the Bethesda Naval Hospital. He was isolated and feared for his life. On May 22nd, his body was found below his hospital window. His death was ruled a suicide, but this CIA memo tells a different story.
The untimely death of Secretary Forrestal was deemed necessary and regrettable.
If it should ever be possible to prove that the documents are true, then obviously they indicate a very, very different history than we thought. They indicate layers of government we don't know exist. They indicate procedures of government that seem anti-constitutional. They paint a picture of a world that is wildly different than the average person expects. And of course also a world in which there are aliens flying around and being captured and studied by government forces. It's a very odd picture indeed.
I'm convinced, based upon the evidence that's building up, that something very strange is happening. That the number of sightings of all types are just out of all proportion to something that's not real. There's something very, very strange about that. So it is the preponderance of evidence. It is the old-timers coming forward. It is the documents that Bob and Ryan Wood are putting together that is powerful forensic research, making a very, very powerful case. It's hard to ignore.
We have selected the techniques that question document examiners use. We've hired some question document examiners, and those techniques are very powerful because they permit a judge in a courtroom to tell the difference between a genuine document and a fake document. The degrees of authenticity can be determined by comparison of the specialized stamps, file numbers, date formats, line spacing, and paragraphing with known authentic archival documents. File markings are often particularly common. Some of the documents have misspelled words. Does this mean they're frauds? We don't think so. These originals are probably rough drafts, which would have typos and temporary spellings until the final draft was complete. One of the things that question document examiners do to authenticate documents is to look at the type. And so when you study the typography and become familiar with how the hot lead printing presses of that era work, you find that once every so often there was a letter Z that was raised because it was not commonly used. We found a document in that era that shows a raised Z, and we have in our own document about every third Z is raised. And this is just exactly the kind of thing that telegraphs authenticity.
If you're talking about leaked documents, the provenance of leaked documents, we need to know where they've come from. We need to see the originals. And one has to admit that in 99% of cases, we do not see the originals.
We have several documents that are original pages. These permit testing that cannot be done with copies. For example, we can date a document by analyzing its ink. A small sample is punched out, leaving a pinhole in the paper. The ink is then dissolved, and by using liquid chromatography, the colors are compared with a standard library of inks. The imprint made by the individual typewriter keys can be used to compare with a library of typewriter fonts. The watermark on the paper can often be found and dated. Sometimes we can even see through the blacked out areas and decipher the hidden words.
During the authentication process of the Eisenhower briefing document, Stan Friedman went to the National Archives and in the presence of an archivist found in their files what's known as the Cutler-Twining Memo, which mentions MJ-12, MJ-12 Special Studies Group. We have an original onion skin paper with the appropriate watermarks, original declassification markings. It is hard, physical, testable piece of paper. It's in a secure facility at our National Archives in College Park, Maryland.
This declassified document seems to provide proof that MJ-12 was a reality, even though the government has never acknowledged its existence.
So, after you use these question document techniques, to the best of your ability, it turns out that the documents almost speak for themselves as being genuine.
If the majestic documents are real, they provide new insight into perhaps the most closely guarded secret in the history of the world. A secret that has been fiercely protected for a very long time.
I think that government secrecy, classifying this information at what amounts to an above top secret level, was absolutely warranted in 1947, and maybe earlier, because I think all this business got started perhaps during the Second World War.
It is the recommendation of the President's Special Panel, with concurrence from Majestic 12, that a policy of strict denial of the events surfacing from Roswell, New Mexico, and any other incident of such caliber be enforced. An interactive program of controlled releases to the media in such fashion to discredit any civilian investigation be instituted in accordance with the provisions of the 1947 National Security Act.
Certainly in 1947, the government could not afford to tell the world. They could not afford to say, look, there are these alien spacecraft penetrating our airspace. We don't know where they're from, what they want, or how they operate, but we thought you'd like to know. That would have been totally irresponsible. There's no question it was justified at the time until they had answers.
I think it's quite possible that much secrecy is due to the fact that the authorities do not have all the answers. That they cannot be certain from a day-to-day basis or even a year-to-year basis or whatever as to precisely what is going on.
By the mid-1960s, the government's apparent interest in UFOs was waning, but a rash of new sightings of unexplained lights and moving objects reignited the debate.
They are being observed by some type of device which is ahead of us, far ahead of us, and is probably controlled by a highly advanced superior civilization. Now this is a conclusion which I personally have stated and is shared by some members of our Board of Governors and advisors, not all of them. But it has reached the point where many people in the Air Force have the same conclusion. In fact, the Air Force at one time had a top secret estimate that these things were interplanetary spaceships.
Based on what is known of the technology and intelligence of the visitors, it is fairly certain that there will be other sightings and encounters of a spectacular nature. As to the purpose and modus operandi, we are not certain, but it is clear that if these visitors had conquest in mind, it would not be difficult for them, given their ability to penetrate our airspace at will.
I think that now it's evolved into a more multi-layered problem. Part of it dealing with high technology projects and keeping them secure. If they tell the public a few things, there would be a clamor for more information that might jeopardize the security of these programs. Another problem is that the fact that they've covered it up so long would create a sort of backlash against the government and the intelligence establishment.
If these documents show a long, systematic, highly articulated process for handling UFO-related information, for sequestering that information, for marshaling it here and there, and for keeping everybody else out of the loop, completely unaware. The structure that caused that to occur is a phenomenon in world history.
I think the MJ-12 documents are extraordinarily important, probably the most important government documents ever leaked to the public, because they make clear, if they're genuine, that the United States has known that aliens are visiting Earth, that they are not perfect, obviously at least one crashed, and we have been taking measures to try to learn as much as we could from the wreckage and to try to understand what's going on.
Why on earth would they have kept it secret? The discovery of extraterrestrial life, the greatest discovery in the history of man. The main reason, of course, is still a lot of reason today, and that is to make sure their enemies, namely in those days the Soviet Union, did not get the technology. The technology was the driver. In addition, the reason for keeping it secret is to not let the public know that we really couldn't control our airspace.
With urgent speed, the jet fighters rush to get in the air. Every second counts. They must be able to intercept the mystery plane before it can reach its target and drop its bomb.
One example of technology discussed in the documents is a report, an analytical report from the Research and Development Laboratory dated 2 September 1947, where it has an early description of fiber optics in essence, and it says,
flight instruments and controls are activated by optical waveguide fibers, similar to glass rods, except they are flexible and have a plastic cladding wrap.
This cladding wrap is sort of a key breakthrough in fiber optics that allows increased signal and noise. Now here, this is a guy talking, describing fiber optics in 1947.
One of the documents that is particularly exciting is a document that was done at the end of December 1947, prepared and approved by Lieutenant General Nathan Twain. This included the results of what our scientists and engineers have been able to evaluate and determine during the summer. And one of the things that really strikes me is a description that talks about a series of fine grid-like lines connecting a series of dots in pure silver. This is very close to a description of an integrated circuit today.
One interesting thing about the craft itself, it carried no fuel. There was no fuel. They assumed that it was propelled by a series of cells, Arctic and shaped cells underneath the craft itself, which indicates that evidently they were grafting energy from the atmosphere somewhere. That is one of the areas that they haven't discovered, they haven't found out yet.
As far as this idea of reverse engineering a crashed or captured spacecraft, I would hope that's been done. I hate to think that something has been sitting there longer than the lifetime of most of the people who will see this program and nothing's been done to it. The potential for learning is astounding, and not attempting to reverse engineer it would be unthinkable.
The YB-49 Flying Wing makes its maiden flight. This is the shape of things to come.
What if in the last 5 years we developed new techniques for monitoring vehicles in the sky? We've got stealth aircraft, maybe the other guy will have stealth aircraft. Should that be made public? And if we use those techniques to monitor flying saucers, should that be made public? Should the secrecy continue now? I've never been an advocate for putting everything on the table, especially technology. I have mixed feelings about what the government should do about covering up the truth about flying saucers. I would like the government to stand up, take away the ridicule that's been heaped on a lot of people. So a government announcement would bring forth a tremendous amount of data.
Are these documents authentic, and is their narrative real? I believe that there are 4 possibilities. One, of course, is that they are frauds created as a hoax by a gifted amateur. The second possibility is that they are officially constructed disinformation, perhaps created decades ago for the purposes of Cold War misinformation for some kind of geopolitical purpose. The third possibility is that the narrative is a mixture of fact and fiction. And then the fourth possibility, of course, is that they are authentic, genuine, leaked documents that describe some remarkable events concealed from the history books.
The concept that we are not alone in the universe has captivated many since the beginning of mankind. Throughout history, artists have included flying objects in their paintings, like this one from 17th century painter and protege of Rembrandt, Art de Gelder. Today, Believers outnumber skeptics 3-2. People around the world continue to report UFO sightings, but proof of extraterrestrial contact remains elusive. If the MJ-12 documents are genuine, the story they tell is astounding. If and when this story is brought to light, what impact will it have on our destiny?
Philosophically speaking, I have to say that we're moving rapidly into a different kind of world in which the possibility of life from elsewhere is increasingly non-alarming.
Our space exploration is bringing us to the point where we're ready to explore the outer planets, and probably within a century go outside of our solar system altogether. So it's time that Parliament was exposed for the sake of science, for the sake of the stability of our government, for the sake of civilization itself.
I've steeped myself in flying saucer information for more than 40 years. I've worked on classified government-sponsored programs. It's clear that there has been an organized effort to discredit every aspect of the UFO phenomenon. These documents are no exceptions. If they're genuine, they're of extraordinary importance for all of mankind.
If, in fact, we have recovered an extraterrestrial spacecraft sometime in the past 50 years, then, of course, we are in possession of definitive evidence that we are not alone. One of my heroes in life, Carl Sagan, was fond of saying, on the day that we do discover that we're not alone, our society may begin to evolve and transform in some incredible and wondrous new ways. That's a day to look forward to, I believe.
On November 7, 1972, in one of the largest landslide election victories in American history, Republican Richard Nixon won re-election to a second term as president by defeating his Democratic opponent, George McGovern, with over 60% of the popular vote. It was Richard Nixon's greatest personal triumph. But just 6 months earlier, on June 17, 1972, 5 men were arrested for a bungled break-in at the Democratic National Committee offices at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. Over the next 2 years, this fateful incident would evolve into one of the biggest political scandals in national history, Watergate, a scandal that would ultimately destroy Nixon's presidency. 2 CIA operatives directed the 1972 break-in. E. Howard Hunt, Jr., who specialized in political dirty tricks, had organized the break-in on orders from the Nixon White House. Hunt's partner in this operation was G. Gordon Liddy, who was then working as attorney for Nixon's committee to re-elect the president. This third-rate burglary, at first dismissed as a political prank, spiraled into a vast political scandal that ultimately led to Richard Nixon's impeachment. Over the entire 2-year course of the sordid Watergate investigation, the secret documents that Nixon feared were held at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate Hotel were never revealed. Just what secrets would Nixon be willing to sacrifice his presidency, in fact his entire political career, to keep hidden? At last, perhaps those astounding secrets that link Watergate, the Kennedy assassination, and ultimately the alien reality have been revealed. On June 29, 2015, video producer Daniel List, otherwise known as Dark Journalist, asked former Watergate attorney Douglas Caddy if he would be willing to talk about his own experiences with the Watergate break-in and his friendship with one of the break-in's primary CIA architects, E. Howard Hunt. Caddy agreed, and his insights and revelations about Nixon, Kennedy, and conspiracy politics in general were absolutely stunning. Two years before Watergate in 1970, former CIA super spy E. Howard Hunt was working for Robert R. Mullen Company, a public relations subsidiary of General Foods that was also a front for the CIA. While there, Hunt met attorney Douglas Caddy, and the two men became friends. Caddy insists that at the time he did not know the Mullen Public Relations firm and Howard Hunt were both CIA assets. One of Hunt's covert assignments in his CIA Mullen work was to head up a political dirty tricks unit for the Nixon White House, the unit that ultimately conducted the burglary of the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex. Early on June 17, 1972, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, Hunt's 5 henchmen were discovered and arrested by police. E. Howard Hunt then called his attorney friend Douglas Caddy to secure defense for the burglars arrested at the Democratic National Committee headquarters. Over the 2-year course of the federal Watergate investigations, E. Howard Hunt was charged with conspiracy and sentenced to serve 33 months at the minimum security federal prison at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. In 1975, just before Hunt departed for prison, he requested a farewell dinner with his friend Douglas Caddy at the Yenching Palace restaurant in Washington, a favorite hangout notorious for political deal-making. As their meal progressed, Caddy pressed Hunt for the true reasons behind the Watergate burglary, suggesting the motive behind the break-in had to do with a rumored prostitution ring that was operated out of the Democratic National Committee headquarters.
And so there's got to be another reason why he went in there. And he hesitated for a moment, and I said yes, and he said, well, there was another reason. And I said, well, what was that? And he said, we believe there were Cuban government reports in the Democratic National Committee that that were connected to the Kennedy assassination. To the Kennedy assassination. And I said, wow, Cuban government reports that would be connected to the Kennedy assassination, that would give us information about the Kennedy assassination. He said yes. And I said, well, what were in those? What do you believe were in those reports? Because obviously they did not have a chance to get those reports because they were arrested before they had a chance to do virtually anything. And at that point, he just held up his hands, went like that, and said, "Please, no more questions." You know, no more questions, you know. And so we turned to other. I won't say we kept it light because you can't keep it light with him going to prison, you know. But we did discuss his children and my circumstances and so forth. And so we had a congenial dinner, and then we walked out. And on the street there, I thought, well, this is the last time I'll see Howard. I'm going to make one more stab, okay?
Yeah.
And seeing if I can get something here, you know. And I said, well, Howard, why was John Kennedy assassinated? What would be in those reports that would be important? He said, why was John Kennedy assassinated? He said John Kennedy was assassinated because he was about to give our most vital secret to the Soviets. About to give our most vital secret to the Soviets. And I was stunned by that. I mean, John Kennedy, our president, the Soviets, and I never even heard about such a thing. And he said, and I said, well, what was that? And at that point, he leaned forward and looked right in my eyes, looked in my eyes, and he said, the alien presence. And he reached out and shook my hand, and then turned and walked away. And that was the last time I saw Howard Hunt.
Caddy found Hunt's alien presence statement at first puzzling and enigmatic, being a Washington attorney himself and not a UFO researcher. But he sensed what Hunt told him held great significance. His later research would prove him correct. In fact, it would ultimately reveal an intricate spiderweb network of interlocking corporate, military, and intelligence connections, forming an invisible supergovernment that secretly dominated the White House and still does to this day. A supergovernment specifically created in 1947 to deal with the alien presence. To briefly review how this breakaway supergovernment came to be, just 2 years after the 1945 Trinity atomic bomb test in New Mexico, something strange fell out of the sky not far from where that first nuclear device was detonated. On July 8, 1947, the United States Army filed a sensational report that a crashed flying saucer was recovered near Roswell, New Mexico. The following day, however, the Army recanted its astounding claim, stating that the debris recovered was nothing more exotic than a lost weather balloon. Just the same, a rash of unidentified flying object reports that year swept the entire country. So in September of 1947, just 2 months following the alleged Roswell saucer crash, President Harry S. Truman signed into law the National Security Act of 1947, which created the National Security Council and America's first peacetime civilian intelligence organization, the CIA, an intelligence agency mandated with no provision for congressional oversight. As well, Truman formed a secret ad hoc committee to specifically investigate the alien presence, known as Majestic 12 or simply MJ-12. The sudden appearance of these UFOs presented a potential military threat that required development of a top priority research effort to investigate, emulate, and if possible, surpass the flight performance of such unidentified aircraft as quickly as possible. And once again, as with the original Manhattan atomic bomb project, this research had to be conducted in absolute secrecy, funded with vast amounts of monies entirely hidden from any congressional or public scrutiny. Consequently, this operation precipitated the discrete restructuring of the national security establishment, turning it into an autonomous, invisible political state unto itself. Truman's successor, Dwight Eisenhower, inherited management of this national security state and the alien secrets it protected. But in 1954, the year following his election, it was rumored that Ike himself actually had a face-to-face contact with the aliens. And who at this time was Eisenhower's vice president? Richard Nixon. Little known to most Americans, Prescott Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush's father, was top Wall Street financier of Nixon's early political career. The 1946 Nixon congressional campaign was funded by Eastern financial interests, the Bank of America, big private utilities, and the major oil companies. Then again in 1960, the Bushes backed Nixon passionately in his presidential campaign against John F. Kennedy. As president, Nixon would serve the Bush interests, linking Eastern bankers, Texas oil men, and intelligence operatives. As Dwight Eisenhower's vice president, Nixon had already established himself as a major political player in the military-industrial complex. In the summer of 1960, while serving as chairman of the 54-12 Committee, which oversaw covert activities, Vice President Nixon contacted famed aircraft designer and business tycoon Howard Hughes to arrange the assassination of communist Cuban dictator Fidel Castro without the United States government's fingerprints on it. Howard Hughes agreed. Despite rumors of mental instability, Howard Hughes was in fact a powerful master of multiple defense-related industries and also one of Nixon's secret donors. This Castro operation he delegated to Robert Mayhew, his right-hand man, who sought out assistance of both the Mafia and, of course, the CIA to do the job. And so the plans for the Bay of Pigs invasion, codenamed Operation Zapata, which just happened to be the name of the Bush family's Texas oil company, had been set up under Nixon's directive to Howard Hughes. But in November of 1960, the unthinkable happened. A political novice senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy, defeated the seasoned political professional vice president, Richard Nixon, in the national presidential election. Despite this astounding turn of events, plans for the invasion of Cuba continued within the Defense Department and the CIA without JFK and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, knowing about it. On April 17, 1961, barely 4 months into the Kennedy administration, the fateful invasion was launched, resulting in a colossal failure and embarrassment to both the nation and President Kennedy personally. Thus, the driving motivation behind the Watergate burglary of 1972 was recovery of documents pertaining to this Nixon-Cuban invasion connection. Lawrence O'Brien, then chairman of the Democratic National Committee, had formerly served as Washington lobbyist for Howard Hughes. It was Nixon's paranoia that the Democratic Party possession of the Cuban government's report on the Kennedy assassination, if it did exist, and if it were disclosed, would destroy his political career by exposing his complicity in the covert chain of events that ultimately led to John F. Kennedy's murder. But perhaps, as Douglas Caddy suggested, knowledge of the alien presence was Nixon's greatest secret. An anecdotal side note to the Nixon presidency involves popular comedian and television personality Jackie Gleason, who was a staunch supporter of the Republican Party and eventually became good friends with Richard Nixon. Gleason and Nixon would golf together, and according to Gleason, Nixon shared his interest in UFOs, although he didn't like to talk about it. But during a trip to Florida to help support a charity event that Gleason was sponsoring, Nixon decided it was time to reveal the alien presence to his friend. Gleason's wife recounts that her husband Jackie arrived home unusually late on the evening of February 19, 1973. He said he had been to Homestead Air Force Base where he had seen alien bodies. Earlier that evening, Richard Nixon had arrived at Gleason's house alone in his private car and told Gleason that he wanted to show him something. Together they drove to Homestead Air Force Base. The gate security guard, stunned to see the president himself in the car, waved them through. Inside a well-guarded building, Nixon showed Gleason a number of laboratories that led to an inner chamber. Within this chamber were several containers that looked like glass-top freezers. And inside these containers, Gleason saw preserved bodies he thought were mangled children. But upon closer examination, he saw they were not human. He described them as small, only about 2 feet tall, with bald heads. Gleason remained profoundly shaken by this experience for days, disturbed that the government would deliberately keep the alien presence hidden from the public. If authentic, Gleason's tale remained yet another of Nixon's well-guarded secrets. Five years after the Roswell crash, the alien presence still remained a top priority national security issue. In July of 1952, UFOs were buzzing the nation's capital, and Harry Truman was powerless to stop them. In 1954, Truman's successor, Dwight Eisenhower, allegedly had first-hand meetings with the aliens at Muroc Air Base in California, where he was urged by these entities to cease nuclear weapons development. I declined, but instead, by secret executive memorandum MSC 5510, Eisenhower later established MJ-12 as a permanent committee to oversee and conduct all covert activities concerned with the alien presence. A major finding of this study committee was that the public could not be told. It was believed that such disclosure would almost certainly lead to collapse of economic and religious institutions, leading to general social disorder, ending in total anarchy. Secrecy was imperative. As well, Congress could not be told, requiring that funding for alien research projects would have to come from outside the government, from confidential CIA non-appropriated funds. In the final months of World War II, the United States had already seized possession of Japanese General Tomoyuki Yamashita's Golden Lily war treasure. Tons of stolen gold bullion and other valuable items scoured from across China and Indochina, hidden in caves north of Manila in the Philippine Islands. President Truman authorized this Japanese plunder to be held as a state secret, a vast wealth of treasure sequestered for an off-the-books covert operations funding reserve. But aside from captured Japanese war loot, MJ-12 decided that a viable means for funding alien research projects was to corner the illegal drug market. The British and French had established historical precedents in the 19th century by exploiting the Far East opium trade to fill their coffers and gain political domination of China and Vietnam, respectively. A young, ambitious member of the Council of Foreign Relations was approached. His name was George Herbert Walker Bush, who at that time was president and CEO of Zapata Oil Company, based in Texas. Zapata Oil was experimenting with a new technology of offshore drilling. Oil rigs ideal for drop-off shipments of drugs from South America by fishing boats, which in turn could be discreetly smuggled into the United States. George Bush agreed to help organize this CIA operation, which worked better than anyone had dreamed. Thanks to George Herbert Walker Bush, also known as Poppy, the CIA now controls most of the world's illegal drug markets, which explains the agency's intimate ties to the mafia. During the 1950s, over the course of Richard Nixon's term as vice president, Cold War weapons competition between the United States and Soviet Russia became more deadly. As such, the CIA's non-appropriated funds were put to urgent use, designing a high-altitude spy plane to maintain surveillance of Soviet military potentials. In 1954, President Dwight Eisenhower authorized CIA Director Allen Dulles to proceed with a crash program to develop a top-secret spy plane to accomplish that mission. The remote area of the Nevada Salt Flats was chosen as the secret test location for the CIA's U-2 spy plane. In 1955, Lockheed Aircraft Corporation initiated its first Black Ops aircraft project at what would eventually become the notorious Area 51, home to numerous Black Project aircraft, some even rumored to be back-engineered from alien UFO designs. Coincidentally, the Lockheed Corporation also manufactured airplanes for Howard Hughes. CIA projects discreetly financed by streamlined procurement, off-the-books contingency funds were managed by Richard Bissell, director of the U-2 project, who was later joined in 1961 by Air Force General Charles P. Cabell, who became deputy director of the CIA under Allen Dulles. Together, this Dulles-Bissell-Cabell intelligence nexus of secret bankers was joined by none other than Nelson Rockefeller, who helped privately fund development of the CIA's Corona spy satellite to introduce a satellite network intended for UFO surveillance as well. Essentially, these men were forming a dynamic interface alliance with national intelligence, military, corporate, and financial interests that were drifting further away from constitutional legality or executive authority. Of course, circumventing constitutional legal authority just happened to be the expertise of Allen Dulles, considering his corporate law background before World War II, when he and his brother John Foster Dulles were liberating major American corporations from government restrictions against investing in Hitler's Third Reich. By 1961, President Eisenhower was so alarmed by the menacing illegal power festering within this military intelligence network that upon leaving office, he warned in his farewell television address against the looming danger of the military-industrial complex.
This evening, I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell, and to share a few final thoughts with you, my countrymen. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizen can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
the energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Less than 1 month after Kennedy's inaugural address, more than 50 UFOs at a high rate of speed and obviously under intelligent control invaded the skies over Europe.
All through the late 50s and early 60s, large numbers of circular metallic objects were flying all over Central Europe. I must tell you that not only were they flying then, but they're still flying today. These objects were circular, they were metallic, they were flying at a very high altitude, in formation, obviously under intelligent control. They would generally fly out of the Soviet sector from the east, over Central Europe, over a divided Germany, over France, southern England, over the southern coast of England. These formations would generally turn north and disappear off of NATO radar over the Norwegian Sea. Now, for a number of years, the Soviets thought those objects belonged to us. And for a time, we thought they actually might belong to the Soviets. Now, their flying over Europe had a number of times almost had we and the Soviets shooting at each other.
According to the testimony of former United States Army Command Sergeant Major Robert O. Dean, who was stationed at NATO headquarters, again on the night of February 2nd, 1961, roughly 50 of these objects flew over in formation at a high rate of speed, obviously under intelligent control. The Soviets went on red alert. They closed all of the borders in Berlin. We went on red alert. Everybody responded. The teletypes were going off. Phones were all ringing. All hell was breaking loose all over Central Europe. We thought the war had begun. As long as UFOs continued to freely violate the airspace over superpower nations, the threat of accidental nuclear war was a clear and present danger to global survival. By the time of John F. Kennedy's presidency, excessive UFO secrecy in itself had become a threat to national security. Much like his predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower, President John F. Kennedy entered office deeply suspicious of the military-industrial complex. And rightly so, just as Eisenhower warned, the Pentagon and its CIA cronies launched the failed Black Ops Cuban invasion fiasco on April 17, 1961. And just 10 days later, on April 27, 1961, President Kennedy bluntly stated his mistrust of the national security state to the American Newspaper Publishers Association.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
In June of 1961, President Kennedy took direct action against the CIA's power monopoly when he issued National Security Action Memorandum 55, in which he directed that the Defense Department assume oversight of the CIA's covert activities. Kennedy had launched his own private Cold War with MJ-12 and the military-industrial complex. And just to show he meant business, Kennedy fired the CIA's secret bankers, Allen Dulles, Richard Bissell, and General Charles Cabell. According to the research of investigative reporter Jim Mars, a controversial MJ-12 document titled Interplanetary Phenomena Unit Summary noted Kennedy's insider knowledge. This document, apparently written soon after the New Mexico UFO crash in July 1947, states, "It has become known to Counterintelligence Corps that some of the recovery operation was shared with Representative John F. Kennedy, Massachusetts Democrat elected to Congress in 1946, son of Joseph P. Kennedy, Commissioner on Organization of the Executive Branch of the Government. Jack Kennedy had limited duty as naval officer assigned to naval intelligence during the war. It is believed that information concerning the Roswell crashes was obtained from a source in Congress who was close to the Secretary of the Air Force. It was suspected that Kennedy was the only congressman who was aware of the truth of the Roswell incidents at that time. Watergate attorney Douglas Caddy's personal research into the alien presence also suggests that well before becoming president, Senator John F. Kennedy was likely aware of the alien presence, perhaps as early as the 1950s. Caddy discovered a cryptic written exchange from Dr. Donald Menzel, member of MJ-12, to Senator John F. Kennedy, who in 1957 served on the Board of Overseers of Harvard University, that stated, "When you get that pending security granted, there are things I want to talk with you about my work with the NSA and these other activities." The significant thing about Dr. Menzel was his membership in Majestic 12, which likely granted him full knowledge of the alien presence. Douglas Caddy also suspected that by reorganizing the CIA and Defense Department, Kennedy was maneuvering to place full knowledge of the alien presence under White House executive control. In the early 60s, the newly established National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, heavily promoted as a strictly civilian agency dedicated to the peaceful exploration of space, was an agency enthusiastically supported by President Kennedy. If any president could have successfully sold the alien presence to the American people, it would have been JFK.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal?
And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others do.
By generating popular support for manned lunar exploration, Kennedy was bringing more pressure to bear on MJ-12 and NASA to disclose the extraterrestrial reality. But the month after Kennedy's stirring mandate to put men on the moon, the world was teetering on the brink of total nuclear war. In October 1962, it was learned that Soviet offensive missiles were being installed on the island of Cuba. Kennedy successfully faced down the Russian challenge, but for 3 harrowing days, both superpowers faced mutual assured destruction. From that point, Kennedy became even more determined to reduce dangerous hostilities between the United States and Soviet Russia. On November 12, 1963, just 10 days before his assassination, JFK issued his fateful National Security Action Memorandum Number 271, ordering the Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, James Webb, to initiate a joint space program with the Russians. I would like you to assume personal initiative and control responsibility for the development of a program of substantive cooperation with the Soviet Union in the field of outer space, including the development of specific technological proposals. These proposals should be developed with a view as to their possible discussion with the Soviet Union as a direct outcome of my September 20, 1963 proposal for broad cooperation between the United States and the USSR in outer space, including cooperation in lunar landing programs. Kennedy also filed notice of this NASA directive with the new director of the Central Intelligence Agency, John McCone, wherein he specifically mentioned his concern to make clear distinction about unknowns in space posing a possible security threat. As I had discussed with you previously, I have instructed James Webb to develop a program with the Soviet Union in joint space and lunar exploration. It would be very helpful if you would have the high threat cases reviewed with the purpose of identification of bona fide as opposed to classified CIA and U.S. Air Force sources. It is important that we make a clear distinction between the knowns and unknowns in the event the Soviets try to mistake our extended cooperation as a cover for intelligence gathering of their defense and space programs. At this point, JFK's maneuvering to challenge MJ-12 became intolerable. Black Ops plans for Kennedy's murder went into motion. Kennedy assassination archivist Robert Wood, physicist and retired aerospace manager, has revealed rare documents that suggest CIA plans for JFK's murder. Dr. Wood, who is the foremost expert in analyzing MJ-12 documents using forensic methods, has concluded these burned documents suspiciously infer an assassination directive. Woods gained access to these documents from a whistleblower who claimed to work for James Jesus Angleton, the CIA's chief of counterintelligence, and at the time of Angleton's death, claimed he rescued a 9-page memorandum from a fire intended to destroy Angleton's most sensitive MJ-12 files. On November 12, 1963, President John F. Kennedy had won Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev's support for joint space missions, as well as sharing classified UFO files. As such, both leaders instructed their respective UFO working groups to share information. Kennedy did this through his top-secret memorandum to the director of the CIA. This memorandum was relayed on to James Jesus Angleton, Chief of CIA Counterintelligence. Angleton controlled access to the most highly classified UFO files in the United States and was in direct communication with MJ-12. Kennedy's request was a direct threat to MJ-12 operations that Angleton was mandated to protect. In case any senior United States official did not cooperate with MJ-12, the directive sanctioned political assassination. It would have been Angleton's responsibility to implement this MJ-12 assassination directive in response to President Kennedy's November 12, 1963 request for the CIA to release classified UFO files to the Soviets. Revealed on one of these partially burned, top-secret MJ-12 documents was a cryptic assassination directive. As you must know, Lancer, JFK's code name, has made some inquiries regarding our activities which we cannot allow. Another scorched document states, draft directive regarding project environment. When conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment and Washington cannot be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation. It should be wet. Wet work is Black Ops slang for murder. Handwritten initials JJA suggest James Jesus Angleton's approval. In his book Behold a Pale Horse, researcher Milton William Cooper briefly summarized JFK's conflict with MJ-12 like this. President Kennedy assured them that if they did not clean up the drug problem, he would. He informed MJ-12 that he intended to reveal the presence of the aliens to the American people and ordered a plan developed to implement his decision. President Kennedy's decision struck fear into the hearts of those in charge of MJ-12. His assassination was ordered by the MJ-12 Policy Committee, and the order was carried out by agents in Dallas. Some researchers are so bold as to suggest that JFK was on his way to actually make his alien presence disclosure at the Dallas Trade Mart when he was shot in Dealey Plaza on November 22, 1963.
Here is as we're looking at CBS the world turns. In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. The first reports say that President Kennedy has been seriously wounded by this shooting.
JFK was dead. CIA Director Allen Dulles, whom Kennedy had fired, was appointed to Lyndon Johnson's assassination inquiry, the Warren Commission. And the mayor of Dallas, Earl Cabell, just happened to be brother to the other CIA administrator Kennedy fired, General Charles P. Cabell. And of course, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, whose Justice Department investigations into organized crime, a threat to MJ-12's secret funding, was gunned down 5 years later. From this point, MJ-12 had completely isolated the government's executive branch from further meddlesome interference in alien presence issues. Not until the 1987 presidency of Ronald Reagan would a chief executive make explicit public reference to extraterrestrials. The ultimate irony of JFK's murder is that 35 years later, a joint project of both American and Russian space agencies launched the first cooperative International Space Station into orbit.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
In 1974, Richard Nixon, facing certain impeachment, succumbed to the Watergate scandal and resigned his presidency. His vice president, Gerald Ford, assumed office and swiftly nominated Nelson Rockefeller as new vice president. A Standard Oil tycoon and one of MJ-12's major financial contributors was now in the White House without having been duly elected. The fox was in the henhouse at last. MJ-12 stole the executive driver's seat and has been at the wheel ever since. Having learned their mistakes with JFK, no longer would presidents be elected. Instead, they would be selected appointees of the national security state. American presidents have been reduced to transient custodians of the status quo, whose job is to speak as often as possible of this nation's desire for peace while they act as business agents for the military and their hardware manufacturers. But as the Cold War continued into the 1980s, nuclear weapons hardware remained a source of interest to UFOs. Surveillance and even deliberate tampering by unidentified aircraft at nuclear missile installations still haunted both the United States and Soviet Russia with the potential threat of accidental war. Veteran Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell recently revealed knowledge of such reports from individuals who actually manned missile bases during the 1960s when superpower Cold War tensions were at their peak. I have spoken to many Air Force officers who worked at these silos during the Cold War. They told me UFOs were frequently seen overhead and often disabled their missiles. Other officers from bases on the Pacific coast told me their test missiles were frequently shot down by alien aircraft. There was a lot of activity in those days. The aliens wanted to know about our military capabilities. My own experience talking to people has made it clear the extraterrestrials have been attempting to keep us from going to war and help create peace on Earth. However, such UFO behavior as he described would be considered at least provocative, if not directly threatening, by our defense planners. So in 1983, President Ronald Reagan announced creation of a defense shield over continental America, the Strategic Defense Initiative, coined Star Wars by a skeptical press. And although Reagan publicly emphasized SDI was intended as protection from a Soviet missile attack, was his space-based weapons initiative actually the beginnings of an extended covert Cold War against UFOs?
What if free people could live secure in the knowledge that their security did not rest upon the threat of instant U.S. retaliation to deter a Soviet attack, but we could intercept and destroy strategic ballistic missiles before they reached our own soil or that of our allies?
Reagan clearly voiced his concern publicly about a potential extraterrestrial threat on multiple occasions. At the United Nations, he said,
"In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?"
But was Reagan's SDI announcement simply mass media PR for a space-based weapons system that had already been operational for decades?
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge. A new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace.
Ronald Reagan was succeeded by George Herbert Walker Bush as president, former CIA director, MJ-12 member, and likely custodian of most, if not all, the alien presence secrets since the Eisenhower administration, which Bush steadfastly guarded over the course of his own political career. His successors, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush and Barack Obama continued to hold their silence about extraterrestrials, although Bill Clinton did candidly admit there were administrative powers far beyond his presidential control. The official Obama White House response to the alien question has been, the United States government has no evidence that any life exists outside our planet, or that an extraterrestrial presence has contacted any member of the human race. In addition, there is no credible information to suggest that any evidence is being hidden from the public's eye. But of course, while Obama denies the alien presence, he maintains a war in Afghanistan, a nation which supplies most of the world's illegal opium and MJ-12's #1 cash crop. In 1954, when President Eisenhower allegedly met with aliens at Muroc Air Base in California, British UFO researcher Lord Clancarty claimed an unnamed test pilot was also present at the meeting. That mysterious test pilot may have been none other than Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was far more than just a test pilot. He was an aerospace engineer, a genius aircraft designer and owner of multiple aerospace industries. Hughes' expertise would have been a vital link to back engineering flying saucer technology. As well, the affinity between Hughes and the Central Intelligence Agency was natural, America's most secretive billionaire and the most secretive part of America's government. In a way, Hughes was kind of a modern-day Leonardo da Vinci, an eccentric genius who pushed to the cutting edge of 20th century technology, whether in early talking movies or in space satellites. Just after his death, Newsweek magazine quoted a top-ranking Washington intelligence official as saying, Hughes gravitated into areas that other people refused to go into or didn't believe in. By the close of the 1950s, Howard Hughes had become known as a reclusive millionaire, but his business empire had grown so vast and powerful that his influence could not be underestimated. His interests included the Hughes Tool Company, his perennial cash cow in Houston, Texas, RKO Film Company, TWA Airlines, and the Hughes Aircraft and Aerospace Companies, as well as vast real estate holdings. Hughes government contracts were increasingly entwined with top-secret national defense programs during the Cold War, spying and covert surveillance for trademarks of Hughes technology. It also caused a certain measure of paranoia within the Hughes empire. In the late 1950s, Hughes enlisted former FBI agent Robert Mayhew to be his second in command. Mayhew, who also had ties to the CIA, was Howard Hughes' link to Vice President Nixon's plan to assassinate Fidel Castro. Hughes Aerospace Industries were vital components in a vast complex of interlocking industries that privately managed alien technology research for the national security state, while publicly advancing rocket technology for defense and manned space projects. But aside from providing spectacular television news footage, giant rockets were in fact a monstrous waste of energy and certainly no match for the performance of UFOs. Chemical rockets were clumsy, inefficient, and totally impractical for interplanetary exploration. The ultimate secret to space travel was mastery of the unified field, the fundamental fabric of the space-time continuum itself. So once again, we find this story winding its way back to notorious Area 51, hidden away in the desert waste of Nevada, where Lockheed Aerospace Company dominates black project aircraft designs. Ben Rich, the father of the stealth fighter bomber and former head of Area 51's Lockheed Skunk Works, confided just before his death in 1995 that the Black Ops Research Group had in fact mastered field propulsion flight systems. Ben Rich boasted, "We already have the means to travel among the stars. But these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. We now have the technology to take ET home. No, it won't take someone's lifetime to do it. We now have the capability to travel to the stars. First, you have to understand that we will not get to the stars using chemical propulsion. Then Rich further confided that linear space travel was impractical, but that all points in space-time are connected. Field propulsion systems can transcend linear time, making interstellar space travel a workable practicality. In the span of time from 1947 to 1995, alien technological realities, at first intellectually shattering, had, according to Rich, become workable scientific practicalities to terrestrial engineers. But much like President Eisenhower, in the last months of his physical decline, Rich came to the same realization that the International Corporate Board of Directors, secretly dealing with the alien presence, could represent a bigger danger to United States constitutional authority than the off-world visitors themselves. Noted researcher, author, and disclosure advocate Richard Dolan asks the question, who's really running the show here? At least the human part of it. It's certainly not the President of the United States. It's obvious that there is a power structure behind every president. And it makes sense that the UFO technology issue would become privatized at some point, and the secret clandestine space program would also to a large extent be privatized. It's easier to have something proprietary instead of merely classified if you want to keep a secret. And I think a lot of this has gone into private hands. In other words, the United States Department of Defense personnel do not appear to be the key players in these special access programs. Rather, it's private contractors like Boeing or Lockheed or General Electric and so forth. They really run the show. What we have is, at the classified level, private money that is more likely calling the shots. We're turning now to E. Howard Hunt's cryptic admission to Attorney Douglas Caddy that John F. Kennedy's murder was to keep secret the alien presence. One must ask, if MJ-12 does not answer to our nation's presidents, just who do they answer to? MJ-12, Majestic 12, Magic 12, even the names of this control group suggest occult overtones. A cabal of a dozen anonymous men who control wealth and technology beyond imagination and wield power far beyond constitutional authority. These men are as mysterious as the aliens they claim to protect. Aliens who themselves remain hidden in the shadows. However, if one can infer the nature of these off-world creatures from the chronic skullduggery of the CIA and MJ-12, it would appear that the political preferences of such aliens are decidedly fascist. To quote James Jesus Angleton, it is inconceivable that a secret arm of the government has to comply with all the overt orders of the government. So to assume MJ-12 answers to no one may be a premature assumption. It could well be that MJ-12 is ultimately an instrument of the aliens themselves, and that off-world intelligences have been the invisible architects